Hey guys, welcome back to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. I'm Viv Naforia. So previously on the podcast, I was showing you around Hoot Review, and we were talking about owls and we were talking about postcards. So if you're curious what that was about, owls and postcards, totally listen back to that episode, yeah. So you may recall, in episode 2 of this podcast series, particularly the audio portion of it, the audio only, I was sharing with you, how to find, cool submission calls to submit to, right? And the various places you can check. And yeah, so one of these places, right, is Duo Suma, right? The submission opportunities page they have. Now, quite a few submission management systems out there have discover opportunities pages, and where you can find, submission calls listed, right? And you can filter them. So, if you've been following this series closely, I showed you around in episode 35 Submittables Discover page, and also I showed you Subfolio's Discover page in its own episode too. So, if you do some digging through the podcast, you'll find those episodes. But this is going to be sort of a little bit of a recap for some, perhaps some of it, not all. I just want to take the time to, not just do audio on that a little bit, in terms of finding calls and places to submit to, right? And I guess you could say this is a Q&A video type episode. So the question of the day for this episode would be, should I be paying submission fees, right? Is it a scam? Are literary magazines with submission fees, conning me, right? So I think that's a question that a lot of poets and writers and artists have when they come across submission calls. Just because there's a large amount nowadays charging a submission reading or processing fee. Now, I think it's important to recognize, right? Again, there are tons of lit mags and journals out there, several hundreds actually, that do not charge fees. So you should not at all feel pressure to, pay fees to submit or anything. That whole thing I mentioned, right? A lot of others mentioned, right? You shouldn't have to pay to play, right? Or pay to submit. And editors, state they have various reasons why they charge fees. However, you know, um, there are, as I mentioned, there are tons of places that don't charge fees. So then others are like, well, this place doesn't charge fees. Why are you guys charging fees, right? How come you are charging submission fees? So again, before we dive into the discover pages here, I just want to mention, so a lot of places will tell you that have, let's say they have a $1, $2, or, somewhere between, $3 and $5 submission fees is pretty typical nowadays. I see that. They'll say it goes towards operational expenses. And I think if you're going to charge submission fees, you have to be transparent, very fully transparent in, these are expenses for each year. This is how much it costs for our website. This is how much it costs for our submission management system. This is how much it costs for sending out issues to contributors. These are our, operational expenses in terms of revisions for issues, getting test copies, proof copies sent out, all of that. So I think it's important to have a transparent breakdown of where, the expenses are exactly, and I think a lot of poets and writers and artists, right, they feel like they're being exploited, right, when they see these alarming fees, right? Just an example, right? There's some out there charging $20, right? And I totally have in the past, when I started submitting to Lit Magazine Journals, copped up $20 and, here and there for some of these contests and just even regular general submissions, right? There was this one in Narrative Magazine, I never forgot, I think I mentioned this, it was like an iPhone challenge, right? To fit, the poem has to fit an iPhone screen basically, and it was like $20 for, was it like 3 poems or 1 poem? I can't remember. Anyways, $20 is a lot of money. Think about what you could do with $20, right? You could, you could get a bunch of groceries with that. You could submit to multiple places with that $20, right? Some places just charge $3 to $5 submission fees. So, I would say, you don't feel like you have to pay submission fees. There are, again, poets and writers, artists in the community who have gone several years without paying any submission fees, right? At all. They, have just avoided those places. I've heard from multiple in the community have avoided places that charge submission fees, right? They feel that it's unethical, right? And I understand that, right? I mentioned this with my own literary magazine, right? When we started, right, we had first time, we had a structure of first time is free, and then second time or more has a fee, right? And then we restructured that a little bit and then restructured it slightly, again, in terms of the, for the second time or more, and which calls had, initial fees. We cut it back from over 80%, is a first time free, and then down to 50%. But then, we didn't have our, Dippity Press for, a little bit, right? And we didn't start that till about 2024, and we didn't have any other really anything to offset costs or to, that others could purchase to help out, I think it helps to have a gift shop, to have other series, or do other things besides your literary magazine to cover costs. Now, what some lit mags and journals do, right, if you're going to start one up, or, think about it, they conduct workshops. They work with others in the community to facilitate workshops. Sometimes they split what is gotten, they have maybe a 50-50 split over workshop, signups, right? Or maybe it's 70-30. I don't know how it works. Everyone has a different structure, but guest speakers for workshops, or overseeing those, and events where poets perhaps in the community can sit on poetry feedback events like live sessions, and those can help cover expenses as well. Some lit magazine journals do paid pledges on Substack, right? They paywall some of the content, and that's used to support, right, the publication. A lot of places, again, I mentioned in episode 1, right? They do buy me a coffee, Patreon, right? There's so many, right? And yeah, so I feel like editors who, and again, just a reminder, July 12th is when Dippy Lit Mag discontinued reading fees. I took into consideration a lot of factors, and yeah, I think it's totally possible. Again, other lit magazine journals are running free, so I always felt messed up about having reading fees. Personally, I don't like it myself, right? And yeah, and Dippity Press, we can't quite do that yet, but we do have like disabled writers fee waivers. So yeah. Anyways, I hate fees, so I'm like, we really shouldn't have fees. So I discontinued that at Dippy Lit Mag. So yeah, check out some of our calls if you're interested. However, again, so I feel like if you're a founding editor of a lit mag journal, going to start one, before you start charging reading fees and stuff like that, I would say make sure you've gone through every single option possible before you start doing that. Make sure you've tried, some. Now, I tried, some donation and fundly like sites, right, and support pages, but we weren't getting any traction at the time to those. So it was tough, and I also didn't have my, regular 9 to 5 job or anything like that. I've been, doing projects on the side, for artists, musicians, other things, right, to cover costs, using some publications I've done to cover costs, like all of the sales I have towards Dippity Lit Mag and funding things. So it can get expensive quick, for lit mags and presses, it's whether you be solely online or doing print and online, there's still going to be some cost there. So, I think it's important, some lit magazine journals, what they've done right before starting, right, they do a Kickstarter, or they do a donation event way in advance, right? And yeah, so I would say, make sure you've gone through every possible option before, you start implementing reading fees and processing fees. There are some poets out there in the community, or writers and lists that exist, like Excel spreadsheets of lit mags and journals to avoid, basically, because they charge fees. I don't know if they call them blacklist or whatever, but just know that they exist. I've seen them, Excel spreadsheets of lit mags and journals that charge fees, right? And yeah, so just keep that in mind. And yeah, so I would say, a couple bucks here and there, low, a low range fee. That's reasonable. It's understandable. There are places I've seen that do $1 here or $2. Not a bunch, but I've seen them. I think Dollar Tree was one of them. I don't know if they're still around. And then there was, between $3 to $5 is like the typical range I've seen. And then other places have a fast track option, right? What some places do, they have free submissions, and they have a fast track option, right, for others to get a faster response, to skip the wait in line, right? So yeah, there are several things you can do to not have submission fees in place. Now, some places do become nonprofit. There's paperwork becoming nonprofit, that you have to keep track of a lot of things. If you're interested in becoming a nonprofit, or you're founding editor, going to start a lit mag or journal, listening to this, you know, I would say there seem to be more grant and funding opportunities for nonprofits. That's just, what I'm seeing, I think Amazon has like right a some program, right, a literary program, and then there are several other events throughout the year, for nonprofits to apply for grants and funding. Now, sometimes funding gets slashed suddenly, right? This year with NEA and places got affected by that, right? So, we weren't impacted by that, but a lot of fellow lit magazine journals I know that were planning on the funding coming through and it got slashed, right? So it's hard. It's hard. I know a lot of lit mag editors and journals, editors or staff members are using their own salaries to keep things up and running. So it's really hard. Absolutely. It's not easy, but it's possible, right, to have a fee-free place. So, back to, the whole thing, right? So I mentioned, right, if you're going to start submitting to lit mags and journals, I would say, focus and money is a concern of obviously, right, to everyone, right? And you want to not burn a hole in your wallet. You don't want to feel gypped, right? Or as many say, feel like you're being scammed, right? There are some calls out there, some shady lit mags and journals or pop-up shops, right, that are just they only want the money in your pocket, right? They don't really care about your work. They just like pretend to read it, right? They don't really look at it. They just wait it out, and they're like, oh, they send you a letter. And I think that's really, I'm not going to curse and swear, but that's effed up, right? That's messed up, right? That's just really messed up. That's nasty, right? To do to someone, right? They're like, if they're asking for a fee from you and you're not even reading their work, then that's just really messed up. But there are legit places I shared on this podcast, right? Examples of lit magazine journals that have a small fee, right, of $3 or even $5, right? And they do read your work carefully. It goes through a review process. Some do blind concealed reads. They absolutely do a good job. There are tons of legit ones out there that have a small reading fee, and they do, read your work very carefully and ensure it goes through, the editor's eyes or rounds of review from a reading team. So you just have to be careful, right? I would say, always make sure, again, the masthead's visible or that you're seeing first and last names. Now, some lit mags and journals editors go by pen names. That's okay. But I think it's beneficial to see like the face of who's behind the lit mag or journal. Sometimes I've shared on this podcast, some lit mags and journals, they don't really have that information on their site. However, on social media, you see the founding editor reading, sharing about the publication and things like that. I think it's just better to have like the full staff, the masthead, and a contact address or something where others can reach you by. You want that information to be visible. You want others to be like, they feel safe submitting to you, and you want to be trusted, right? There are a lot of places, or a lot of shady things, right? So many scams today, right? Others pretending to be others. I mentioned, just like last month, someone was trying to pretend to be me and they were reaching out to a bunch of people and going through my LinkedIn contacts and other places and trying to scam people and stuff and get their money. So I would say always verify, addresses and things like that. Always double check, how a lit mag journal intakes submissions and stuff like that. Like, for instance, a lot of places only take submissions, right? Just an example, through Submittable or us, right? Subfolio or via email, right? But you have to very look carefully. There are a lot of phishing scams and email scams, even in the lit mag world and community. You have to be very, very careful. So that's why I think it's good to have submission management systems, to have everything through a central place. Yeah, I feel like email is really messy sometimes and things get lost in the shuffle. So I really like submission management systems. However, as many have said before, right, to have something like Submittable, right? And this is Submittable's Discover page. I showed you this, I think it was episode 35 or somewhere in the 30s, right? And, Submittable is not absolutely necessary for lit mags and journals, right? It's not. There are, tons of lit mags and journals that have used nothing but email or have used, those built-in intake website forms to have submissions, right? Tracked. And there's, ones I mentioned on this podcast, I think alternatives to Submittable, right? I think that was episode 15. So Submittable is not the only submission management system out there. There are lower cost ones for sure, right? I was on Oleada. A lot of places use Google, Google Forms, right? So Submittable is not the only one out there. Yeah, Submittable is packed with features and stuff, but I feel like, again, Subfolio, right? This is Subfolio's find orgs calls and submission calls page. So again, each submission management system that I've come across, or the main ones out there that come to my mind, right? Submittable has a discover page where poets and writers and artists can find calls, right? Subfolio's page is here, right? And they're just starting out, right, and growing. Here we are, right? So over time, this will grow and traffic will be as you could say as as much as submittable. As more publications, lit mags, journals, and presses join Subfolio, right? You'll be able to find more calls in there. And yeah, so then Duosuma is part of Duotrope, right? It's their submission manager. They have this discover page. So yeah, just know, Dual Suma is also one place to use. I think CLMP also implemented a recent discount on Dual Suma for Lit Magazine journals. So it's, for those part of the CLMP membership. So yeah, you can listen back to my episode on CLMP membership. I don't know if I'll do a separate episode on Duotrope and CLMP. I've been mentioning them, sharing some things about them now and then, but yeah. Anyways, so let's get down to how do you find fee-free submission opportunities, okay? So obviously you could do a Google search, right? You could type, places or lit magazine journals with no fees, zero reading fees, right? And ones that pay, right? However, I think that would take some time, right? For sure. This is Duosoma, so I'm gonna come back to this, but obviously, right, chill subs exist, right? Again, they changed the listing page here. And look, guys, we have ratings in here, recommendation. So you may recall from episode 49, I was sharing chill subs, right? And yeah, so about the rating and updates. But in any case, let's go back to the search page here. So you can get to that by doing browse, right? So you can see here, chill subs has filters here, right? And we can click no fee. So you can see here, it's showing 3,255. And these are ones that, again, do not pay. I have it set to no fees. And then if we do open for submissions, right now, that cuts it down to 1,520. And then if we cut it down to ones that have no fee and pay, it's down to 352. So not a lot of lit magazine journals out there are able to, pay poets and writers and artists for the work. And sometimes they have a payment of just, a couple dollars. It's not, not a lot of places I've seen have payments of 50, 100, or $150. The only places I've seen with higher amounts would be off the top of my head, right? I know some places, quite a few places have $25, right? I've shared on the podcast, but I think Taco Bell Quarterly has always been one of the places that has a higher, acceptance payment, right? They went from, it looks like $100 to $150. Only poems, right? Maybe I'll do an episode on that. I'm not sure yet. We'll see how much time I have. Yeah, they have payment. I think I saw 77 for some of their calls. I could be wrong. And they have some other, acceptance payments they do and contests that are much larger, as almost quite large, right? I think they have a contest where it's like a $3,000 award or something. And yeah, maybe I'll cover that. And Rattle, right? Everyone knows Rattle has the annual contest, right? Of, I think what it was like $15,000 or something, guys, right? So yeah, and they do pay poets for their work, right? Things like that for general calls and some of the theme calls as well, right? Their theme calls. Yeah, so they do, but not a lot out there. But there are tons out there with no fees. So again, I would recommend starting with all the no fee ones. Really use the filtering. Create it's beneficial to create a chill subs account. And you can also, create a submittable account. It just takes it takes a few seconds, a minute or two. It doesn't take long to create one. I'm not signed in right now as of August 2025. You don't need to be signed in to view these discover pages, right? Same thing with Subfolio, same thing with Duosuma. But I highly recommend you create accounts with these, and yeah. So it just, it's helpful. You can see save. So when you're logged in, you can save calls, you can bookmark them on some of these discover pages. So yeah. So this is submittables, right? You can filter by no fee, right? And this isn't necessarily true, right? Not all of these calls here, as I shared in episode, I think it was 35, or, look back at the submittable episode. I showed you why this isn't always the case. As you click into some of these calls, there are fees on some of them. And that's mainly something I think submittable, again, should address. And also the Lit Mag Journal doing the call, that's also because they're not entering a fixed amount in there. They're entering in required checkbox fees in there. Even on some places are doing like required tips, which that should be optional, right? Not required. So yeah. Look back at that episode if you're wondering what I'm talking about, in meaning like not all of these fees are necessarily fee free. Because yeah. But I hope Submittable addresses that. and detects like the bottommost form check options where others are doing required fees or different tier levels of fees, right? Because this filter does not detect that as of today still, and I hope they address that one day for sure. You can watch that video I did on Submittable, which shows that, evidently, right, on some lit magazine journals in the community. Yeah, and I think they just need to restructure that basically, to not do that because it's confusing, it's misleading to others, right? You click on no fee and then you like click into the form, right? You go further into these calls and some of them have fees and you're like, what? I thought it was no fee, right? So, yeah. Anyways, yeah, Submittable is a place you can find no fee categories. Just have to, click and be very careful. Don't, prepare your submission and without clicking in further to the call and seeing whether there are actually like any further fees, right? You want to make sure, right? And a lot of places are upfront about how much, whether there are fees or not, right? And have it visible. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. So yeah, discover calls here, subfolio, right? No fee, you can filter, right? And yeah, and then we have Duo Summa, right? So you can see here on Duo Summa, their Discover Opportunities page, right, to submit, right? It says here, I have checked right now, include fee-based, right? And there's a calendar view you can do as well. So if I uncheck this, right, that's going to pull up, it says 153 different calls currently, excluding fee-based ones. So look at that, guys. You can find a lot of calls here that have no fee. That's really helpful. And yeah, so again, you just want to double check the site and right, and just make sure, right, there's no fees or anything like that. Mainly I've only ever run into that on Submittables Discover pages, where there's actually fees when you click into the form on some calls, but for the most part, again, most have been upfront about that. And you can see, the and we just deselect this, right? You can see some places have their fees are, if it's a contest call or, visible here, right? Look at this. And some of these are contests, right? So yeah, fees everywhere, guys. But yeah, there are definitely a lot of fee-free, contest calls and ones where they don't charge writers and they award a cash amount. Yeah. So yeah, Duosum is a great place again, and you can filter by, click on the tag here, poetry, 66 different calls. So, you have a lot of, options, each year, for fee-free places, there are several hundreds out there, totally. So I mentioned, again, I have links out to these in episode 2, and I will relink these to, I think, in this episode, but the full list is in episode 2 and also out of my Substack of episode 2 and elsewhere. So make sure you go through those on how to find submission calls and stuff. So I would say, as a, go with the fee-free places first, then work your way through some of the ones that are in the lower range fees. If you see a place has a visible masthead, they are, active, they're actively promoting poets' work, sharing, they're updating their website, and, it's evident, I like to check out feeds of places that shows, like, contributors, of the tags you can check, right, on Instagram or elsewhere, right? Contributors are getting copies, right? You can see the quality of them typically in photos, screenshots, and that's helpful. So it gives you insight into the Litmag's operations a little bit, whether they're legit or not, keeping things updated, right? And yeah, visible masthead, all of that. So um, it's okay, it's okay to submit to places that have low range fees, within your budget, right? Just keep in mind those small fees can add up real quick, right? Sometimes you can lose like several $100s in a year submitting to lit magazine journals. If you go with the fee ones, right, the fee based ones, right? So just keep that in mind. Be very careful. Make sure you stick to a budget. You're like, I'm going to submit to these fee free places. Mark your calendar, right? A lot of places will tell you in advance these are fee free windows, and they have windows where there are no fees absolutely for a particular month. I think Split Lit Mag does that, and quite a few other lit mags and journals like OK Donkey, I think, has free windows. And what OK Donkey does, and a few others, right? They have a cap on the number of free submissions they have for that window. So you really want to submit earlier than later, right? Because those caps are reached pretty quickly on some of these lit mags and journals, right? Those fee-free windows, because they're really popular, right? People don't want to pay fees, right? We don't want to pay fees. So yeah, earlier the better, right? So really use your calendar, keep track of it. It's important. Absolutely. And yeah, so I mentioned and shared, right, 32 poems, right, a couple other places that have, and like a New Ohio review, some places have you where you're a subscriber, right? You become a subscriber or get a subscription of their literary journal or magazine, right, for the year. And that by becoming a subscriber, they waive the fees for you, right? So they have fee-free windows for current subscribers and those who become subscribers. And I think that's nice, right? So you're getting a subscription, you're getting fees waived, right? And then you are getting issues in the mail, right? So you get something back, right, too. But yeah, not all places do that, right? So you have to check. But there are places out there that do that where you become a subscriber, right? And then you get to have fees waived, right? They have subscriber only windows and stuff, right? So I think that's nice. And yeah, and then another place, right? Submission Grinder, right? So we scroll down here, right? They have exclusions, right? Fee based, and I untick that, and then you can untick temp close, perm close, right? So you can see there's a lot of results shown here, and perhaps not all of these are maybe it takes time to update listings and stuff. So this may not be entirely accurate, but for the most part, a lot of these submission management systems are updated, and teams behind them do the best they can to make sure that they are operational, current, and reflective of what the Lit Mag Journal has, right? And other fellow poets and writers and artist community can help report things and address them, right? And yeah, and they can look at it. But anyways, yeah, Submission Grinder is another place, right? And yeah, and then what else? Poets and writers. So poets and writers, again, has a directory. I mentioned this on the podcast. And this is pw.org, right? Literary magazines. You can see they have reading fee, right? And you can choose no. And yeah, so they have a directory, for finding homes for poems, stories, essays, and reviews, etc. Yeah. So another place that is good to find submissions. And yeah, so anytime there are advertisements on site, guys, I have to mark the episode as promotional, but it's not. These aren't sponsored episodes at all, by the way. But just keep that in mind. So anyways, yeah, CLMP, right? So is another place, right? Now I'm not logged in to CLMP or anything like that. This is a public page. You can see calls for submissions. And yeah, you can see here you can filter and go by publisher type. I don't think they have a fee-free filter in here, but there's a directory, right? In the directory, you can see which lit magazine journals have a fee or not. There's also the CMP directory of publishers and literary magazines and presses, right? And then there's this calls for submissions. So yeah, so you can see here, these are some calls, and yeah, so not some of these contests I'm showing have fees too, and not all of them though. But yeah, you can look through that, dig through it. It's another great place to find places to submit to. And yeah, I had a CLMP episode, what CLMP is, what the CLMP membership is for lit magazine journals, and why it's beneficial, right? The benefits of it. So you can listen back to that. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was episode 16 where I shared that, CLMP membership. So you can listen to that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I just wanted to show you the Discover Opportunity pages again, where you can find calls and places to submit to and homes for work, right? So I'll drop links to all these in the bottom. But again, don't feel like you have to pay submission fees, right? Don't feel like pressure to do that. It's tough, right? Everyone, in terms of everyone has bills to pay, right? And grocery bills and maybe school and things like that. And you can only maybe you have a job, right? And you can only apply so much to submission fees, right? I know some poets and writers community have lost a lot of money submitting to places that are fee based, right? So um, I think, if you really zero in on the places that are fee free, and then, you can gradually maybe, once in a blue moon, you could totally, do a place that has a submission fee, very low range, right? But mostly I would say, a lot of us have tight budgets, right? So focus on the fee free places because there are a lot out there, right? There are. So you can totally start with those. And yeah. So I'm not saying the ones that are fee based are all scams or conning, others in the community. I know a lot of places use those fees to cover expenses and to put it towards things, but in reality, right, it's on us, right, the founding editors of lit magazine journals, to find alternative sources of funding, to really get that funding, to look for it, to ensure we're not, The weight of supporting the publication shouldn't be on the writers, and the writers, right, the poets are submitting, right. It's on the shoulders of the founding editor, and it can be stressful, right, that financial pressure. Of course, editors want to keep things up and running, so it's hard to get a steady stream of funding for sure. Again, a lot of places do self-funding, but then, eventually, right, there's not an infinite amount of cash flow for lit magazine journals, right. It's really difficult, right. Getting funding, getting grants, even becoming a nonprofit and maintaining that, right. It's tough. There's a lot of legwork and paperwork, right. Dippity, for example, is not nonprofit at this time. I know a couple other lit magazines in the community and journals, they're not nonprofits. Um, or anything like that, but there are a lot out there that are. You have to weigh the pros and cons of that, whether that's for you or not. CLMP has more information on that too, and resources, and yeah. So yeah, again, lit mag journal editors, those who found it, right, it's really on them, right, to get that stream of funding, right, and to find ways to do that. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time and energy and effort to sustain that funding, to obtain it, to write letters, to get that, and not everyone's able to do so. So that is where that comes in place. So again, submittable is not absolutely necessary. A submission management system is not absolutely necessary to run a lit mag journal. It's not required, but it does make your editors and staff and team members' lives easier, in terms of organization, keeping track of things, right. I like submission management systems, and there are, again, some low cost ones, right. Submittal is not the one out there, so please listen back to episode 15 again, if you're an editor or someone thinking about starting a lit mag journal, because you have a different couple options, right. And I did make a pros cons list of the different submission managers out there. I haven't used every single one in existence, but I'm aware of most of the ones out there. So I just gave, if I haven't used one myself, I just put limited knowledge and just like my thoughts on it, or where you can find more information on it. And sometimes I put not applicable or no rating on it if I've never used it or really interacted with it before, or have no knowledge of it. So yeah, lots of great places you can find, fee-free submissions, right? No fees, zero reading fees, zero processing fees, and stuff like that, right? So again, be careful, right, when you're submitting to lit magazine journals that have fees. There are some poets and writers in the community I'm aware of, they ended up submitting like $6 to a place, or $8 even, and they never heard back. Or even contest calls. And I apologize if you hear Chihuahua barking in the background. But yeah. So and yeah, so there are places that have charged fees, right, and others never heard back. They never got their money back, right. Most places are like, it's non-refundable fees, right. And places that do fast track options, right, you know for the most part, I've seen, if they don't meet the fast track option, they refund that back to you, right. Not all places do that. They're like, all fees are non-refundable, so you want to be cautious, right. Again, it's hard to, you can't get that money back in a lot of cases, right. The submission reading fees and stuff. So yeah, fees suck, guys. I hate fees, right. It just makes everyone really upset. Like, a lot of poets and writers are like, hell no, I'm not paying any submission fees. I should be paid for my work. And I totally believe, poets, artists, writers should be paid for their work. Sometimes what lit magazine journals do, they provide, copies in the form of payment, like presses even, and things like that, and they do what they can. Some places start off small, paying writers $3, $5, and then they increase that slowly as they gain support or gain traction in their publication series. And some places don't start paying writers for work for a very long time. It takes time to really get to that point, right? For some, no lit mag or journal or press has the same trajectory in terms of getting to that point. And some places, a lot of lit mags and journals fail, right? They do, because they can't sustain the publication without, a steady stream of funds to cover costs of their site, or their submission management system, or putting together issues, right. Some places are paying artists, right, or paying writers, right, and when they can no longer sustain the publication because of financial reasons, right, it gets closed down, oftentimes, or life events happen, right. So every year lit magazine journals, a ton of them close their doors, right. And yeah, as I mentioned in episode 1, some of the other reasons as well why. So, it's hard, right? It absolutely is. But I think it's you know, in the lit mag world of journals and presses, I'm not, I'm not really sure who was the first where the whole submission reading fees came from. I'm not sure which was the first place in the world to do that, or the first couple lit mags and journals to charge reading fees or processing fees. I'm not sure where this whole thing came to be, in terms of, charging for submissions and stuff. So, yeah, it's just interesting how many places do that nowadays, right? And it's also kind of sad and heartbreaking. I know a lot of places want to eliminate fees and stuff like that. And, in some cases, a lot of lit magazine journals, they're short, just maybe $50, 70, $80 for some series, to kick them off, for printing and publication. So every bit helps, donation wise, I've seen from, the community. But again, it really is up to the editor of the Lit Mag Journal to ensure that there's a stream of funding and stuff. So, I do the best I can, right? And we've gone fee free at Dippy Lit Mag, so I'm going to do my best to, maintain that going forwards. And yeah, it's a lot of pressure on my shoulders, and yeah. But anyways, I feel again writers should be paid for their work. We can't do that right now at the moment or anything like that, but who knows? Things change for lit magazine journals, and um, you never know. Some places establish funding later on. As I mentioned, no lit mag or journal's path is exactly the same or journey. There are a lot of similar hurdles we all run into, financial reasons being one of them. Um, but yeah, I think, if you're going to start a lit mag or journal, right, you want to go with the low cost options first, and then you can always like migrate to things. If you want to use a submission management system, you can. There are some low cost plans out there, right? So Folio has some, and Duo Suma is an option, right? Some just, use Oleata till today too, right? I started using, right, I mentioned Google intake forms, then moved to Oleata, then moved to Smittable, and now we're on some Folio, right? So, it's okay to migrate systems, right? To restructure things at your Lit Mag journal. If you're running one, expenses have been going up, in the world, obviously, on everything. So it's really hard. But yeah. So yeah, again, a lot of poets, writers, artists, they avoid, places that charge to submit. It just is, it creates a wall for a lot of poets and writers, especially that just can't afford to, right? Every dollar counts for them. A lot of us, right, we have really tight budgets and expenses, in our life, our families, and everything, and it's really hard. I know some places again have fee waivers, right, for on submissions for disabled writers, or again, I mentioned fee free calls, or having subscriptions in place of fees, right? Yeah. So, annual subscriptions, I mean. So, yeah. Um, I would just say, again, really lean on a lot of these filtering systems. There are some great ones out there, as I shared here, right? Again, Duosuma, Subfolio. I'm going to cover it again. Discover page, Submittables Discover page, Chill Sub, CLP, Submission Grinder, Poets and Writers, and there are several other ones out there. And there are some great Substacks and blogs that some writers in the community have maintained, right? That share calls and things like that have no fees and pay writers. Chill Subs does a good job outside, on their social media channels and Substack, Sub Club, right, sharing calls and things like that. Also, Lit Mag News with Becky Tuck. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any names again, but also does a good job of alerting others in the community of scammy lit mags, right, and very shady practices and setups and structures. So totally give that a follow and subscribe to it. Great content there. So yeah, there are a lot of really beneficial resources out there today for those who are looking for places to submit, and finding homes for work. I think back, several decades ago, right? None of this really existed, right? So we have these tools and resources, right? These directories, databases to make our lives easier. And I love that they exist. So yeah, check out the ones I mentioned. There are several other ones out there, right? Several places that do like lists out to writers and poets, right? And on places to submit to help you find, homes for your work and stuff that don't charge fees. So yeah, I hate fees. We all hate fees. Obviously, they are just really make us feel upset, right? Um, yeah. So again, I feel like if anyone's gonna start charging fees or anything like that, they should make it very transparent why they are, like a breakdown of like maybe their expenses or what costs money and how much is it, and stuff. I know some lit magazine journals editors have put blogs out saying, yeah, it costs us like this amount of money. Even like I mentioned on one episode, right, somewhere, was it TBQ, right? They were like, it was like what, a couple $1,000s for one of their issues, or getting that out and stuff. So it can be expensive, running a lit magazine journal, especially if you're running an international one, providing contributor copies and stuff like that. It can be pretty expensive. So you have to have good budgeting skills. You have to really chart things out in advance. Um, you know, Even if you're solely online, you have to have an idea of what your monthly expenses are, every month. And if you're not going to provide provide contributor copies or anything like that, give others a discount, right? And that's often, required through the CLMP membership, right? A discount if you're not going to provide, contributor copies. So yeah, things to take into consideration, right? The CLMP membership also, those part of it have an annual membership fee, right? And yeah, so I talked about that on the podcast again, so you can listen back to that episode. Was it 14? Yeah, and yeah, so that's pretty much it. I just wanted to do a recap and show you around some of these Discover pages and finding homes for your work again. So I would recommend, listening back to the earlier episodes and going through the series, very carefully on some of the ones I mentioned, right? I've done an episode on Submittable, just an overview, and Subfolio and CLMP and alternative submittable. So look for those episodes. Yeah. And yeah, so I hope this helped you. I hope you got something out of it. P.S. guys, this calendar view on the right hand side here on Duo Suma, right? The current submission opportunities page. And I'm on just poetry right now, filtered, but they have fiction, nonfiction, drama, visual art, multimedia, and then showing all, right? And we can do all here, right? And you can see, right? And we go to poetry. It says for all 153 different calls currently. And then poetry, right? This is just on Duo Suma, right? There's, again, the other Discover Opportunity pages I showed you and directories you can check out. Not by many means all of the ones in existence, but yeah, this calendar view in upper right is really, really helpful. You can see by month, right? Instant Noodles, some other ones I recognize names here. So a lot of new ones, and yeah, no deadline here. There's a category, so you can find a lot of calls, this way. You just got to do some digging, yeah, and the filters really do help. And so I recommend, creating an account with these platforms and databases. Totally great way to find calls, and a lot of the fee free, fee, the ones without fees, right? And yeah, so again, it is hard for editors, right, to go fee free, no doubt. There are some editors of lit magazine journals or founding members, right, who, they themselves are living maybe paycheck to paycheck or have disabilities themselves, or maybe physical circumstances, and maybe they're out of work even themselves, and they're still, doing things on the side to keep things going, time spans where they have no work or anything like that. So there are times, lit magazine journals again go on a hiatus, or they freeze, the operations of the publication until maybe they're able to sustain funding for the next open windows or in advance, or to keep things going, and have breaks sometimes because of that. But in any case, again, great spaces to find calls, right? Submittable has like this select date thing here, and yeah, but I like Dual Suma's like list and calendar view option here. It's pretty neat. So yeah, great places to find calls again, and Subfolio over time will definitely grow. I believe that. So we're on there as a listing, and yeah, so check out the links I'm going to drop in the description again. And yeah, this was just a recap episode, circling back to some of the things I said and showing you, a little bit versus just talking about it, right? So I didn't cover, again, every single, nook and cranny of these spaces, right, where you can find calls and stuff, or the filtering and other things tied to it. But you can, totally check more of that out for sure in your downtime. So yeah, I hope this episode helped again. And now, bye guys. Take care. Yeah. I we'll see if I'll do, we're on episode, it looks like 51, so there might be breaks again. This is technically season one of this series, and if you guys like this series, I might continue it for sure. And yeah, so again, you shouldn't feel like a lit mag journal press, what your interactions with them, you shouldn't feel like they're bloodsuckers, right? Or leeches, right? Or trying to squeeze money out of you, right? Or exploiting you. As I said again, you never want to feel that way with when you're dealing with a lit mag journal press or trying to find a home for your work. You want to go with a place, right, that you feel comfortable with, right? If submission fees make you feel uncomfortable, right, then don't submit to that place. It's simple as that, right? um yeah, so you have the choice, right, of not submitting to those places. It's up to you. So don't feel the pressure to do that. Again, it's okay. There are some lit magazine journals I shared on this podcast, even that have been around for like 2-3 decades, right, that charge very small amounts. And I think Chilsos, by the way, I think it was shared or an announcement somewhere, I can't remember, in a newsletter. Was it Lit Mag News? I can't remember, sorry. But I think they're coming out with a feature where they're going to create like almost like a color coded tags or some sort of thing to indicate which lit magazine journals have lower end fees and which ones have higher end fees, like low range, like a couple dollars, and some quite high, perhaps alarming, fees that are very, very high, right? So yeah. In any case, I really love the filtering options a lot of these places have. I showed right on this podcast. These are just some of the ones in existence, not all again. So episode 2, I shared a little bit more of places that give lists and things like that on calls. Sub Club, right, I mentioned, and some in the social media feed of Chill Subs. Typically, they do posts of like fee free places and places that pay also, and they do those type of lists both through their newsletter and some bite sized ones on social media slides and carousels, right? So yeah, lots of places to check, right, to find fee free, literary homes for your work, and journals. So yeah, that's it, guys. Bye now. Yeah, take care. Yeah. Again, I just try to do these episodes when I can. So not sure when the next episode will be or something. There could be a break or ways off from the next couple episodes. Or sometimes I try to do a couple episodes in advance and then give you time to catch up, or to go through the series, and then yeah. But I just try to do this when I can. And one more thing, just one more thing, and then I promise I'll be signing off. So I mentioned fee waiver requests. So you will come across in, the lit mag world, right? Some places are like, let us know if the fee, if you're absolutely unable to pay the fee or reading or processing fee, if it's an issue, reach out to us, and they have like instructions for how to do that. And yeah, in either case, I know some poets and writers have reached out to places or expressed concern to the Lit Mag Journal about the fee or being at a barrier wall to them. And some places have restructured things, right? They've done like fee-free call windows for others, and then they have that cap, as I mentioned again. So if you see a place mentioning, fee waiver request, reach out to them and say, hey, and let them know, the fee is a wall, a barrier for you to be able to submit to them, and you really want to, So yeah, don't be afraid to do that, especially if they're specifying they can do fee waiver requests, right? Totally see about that. So yeah, that's all. Yeah. So bye now, guys. Yeah, I'm gonna sign off here, and I hope you have a great rest of your summer again. It's just wrapping up here, and then we're gonna move into fall and Halloween and Spooktober and all of that, right? So I don't know. Maybe who knows? Maybe I'll do a Halloween coverage or horror lit magazine journals, right? That might be interesting or something. Talking about some ones that focus on that, because there's some cool ones that out there that do the spooky side of things, right? Haunted houses and vibes and stuff like that, right? Monsters, creatures, all of that. I've come across some in the lit mag world. So who knows? Maybe we'll do that for fun. I don't know. If I'll do it right in October, it might be a bit later, or who knows? I don't know. We'll see. I'll see what I can do. But if not, catch up and listen to some of the past episodes while waiting, or let me know if the series helped you in any way. Drop a comment, and take care. Yeah, bye. Yeah.